I care if we're respected, because right now, Britain is a joke.
There is now an emergency situation at HMP Woodhill. The Westminster elite, well, they turn the other way. The MSM ignore the story and continue their witch hunt. The human rights lawyers are more interested in keeping terrorists, rapists, and murderers in the UK. And every British politician, bar one, Reform UK's Rupert Lowe, ignores the persecution and I would argue mental and physical torture of Britain's foremost political prisoner, even though Elon Musk, the world's richest man and member of the second Trump administration, continues to fund his legal battle. So shame on them all. Because what the state is subjecting Tommy Robinson through in solitary for a piece of independent journalism, whether you agree with that piece of independent journalism or not, is depraved. So here's the information, the breaking information that the MSM is ignoring direct from Tommy's official team. Urgent update on Tommy's situation. Tommy is in solitary confinement for a non-criminal offence. Now they're trying to starve him. The prison has banned him from ordering food for a week, his only source of nutrition, tinned tuna and mackerel, just because he spoke to his son on speakerphone when on a call to another family member. They've blocked visits, cut off phone access, he's lost serious weight, and his mental health is deteriorating. His human rights have been breached repeatedly. This is political persecution, plain and simple, and it's effing spiteful. If they go through with this on Monday, we'll have no choice but to call a protest next week directly outside Woodhill Prison. Enough is enough. And it really is. I mean, I actually feel some responsibility for this situation because the authorities started to crack down on Tommy after my visit to Woodhill in December. Because after that visit, I did broadcast, and I am not ashamed to say it, the information provided by Tommy that the Southport terrorist Axel Rudigerban was practicing as a Muslim behind bars at Belmarsh Prison, where they'd previously been locked up together. That was so clearly in the public interest, and Tommy understands why I had to do that, I know. Now, our very own June Slater summed up the situation with a viral post on X at the weekend. She wrote, "There's a man sitting in a prison cell in solitary confinement allegedly for his own good. His crime has no victim apart from offending the court. He hasn't driven into a Christmas market. He hasn't bombed a kiddie pop concert. He hasn't broken a policewoman's nose by assaulting one. This treatment is so unique, pertaining to one individual, that I don't even need to name him. I truly hope there is some compassion somewhere, be it in the prison service, politics, or the justice system, that finds the courage to stand up for his basic human rights. If there is, he needs you now." And with that, something happened. Because Reform UK's rising star MP Rupert Lowe seemingly defied his leader, Nigel Farage, by pledging to lobby the Ministry of Justice over this situation. He replied directly to June Slater, writing, "Whether you agree with Tommy Robinson's politics or not, he deserves to be treated humanely in prison with reasonable food, visits, and support. I will write to the Ministry of Justice asking to ensure that a fair approach is being taken." Now, it was interesting because there is a split in Reform UK over this. We know that. Howard Cox, who had been one of the party's stars, he was their former London mayoral candidate, but he was axed for supporting Tommy Robinson, axed from the party. And he posted to Rupert saying, "Rupert, I visited Tommy Robinson 2 weeks ago. I signed an NDA, so can't reveal details of my meeting. But I have espoused the same sentiments about him as you have shown in your media comments. The difference, however, I was threatened with expulsion by the new Reform HQ. As a result, I have had thousands of messages of support from disgruntled party supporters, and you have massive respect for doing the same. Why can't the rest of the leadership show the same growing up response too?" And I think that really is a good point from Howard Cox, because as World by Wolf pointed out, what's wild is if Rupert Lowe was not already an MP, he would no longer pass Reform HQ's social media vetting process because of this tweet. Any support for Tommy Robinson results in being disqualified as a Reform candidate, a vetting process designed by Zia Youssef. And increasingly, with this crackdown on free speech going on in the UK, as we saw from JD Vance's scathing Munich speech last week, we are becoming an international embarrassment. Just listen to the disdain at the weekend from Donald Trump when he was asked about Slippery Starmer's upcoming pilgrimage to Washington, D.C.
I just signed a letter to him. He asked for a meeting, and I agreed to the meeting. We're going to have a friendly meeting. Very good. We have a lot of good things going on. But he asked to come and see me, and I just accepted his asking.
Do you have a date for that, sir? And what do you hope to
Very soon. I think he wants to come next week or the week after.
And what do you hope to discuss?
I don't know. It was his request, not mine. But, you know, I've met him twice already. We get along very well. He's a very nice guy.
Very nice guy. But no support there. Indeed, JD Vance was completely and rightfully scathing about our approach. So again, it is Reform's Rupert Lowe, who I think gets the tone right and certainly represents where I am about the situation the UK is facing. Watch.
I don't particularly care if we're liked by the rest of the world. I care if we're respected. Because right now, Britain is a joke, and it has been for some time. Take this, for example. £10 million was set aside for local inquiries into the rape gangs by the Labour government. Just £10 million. This year alone, we sent £133 million to Pakistan in foreign aid. My view? Scrap every single penny. Or at the very least, use it as a weapon to force the Pakistani government to accept their deported rapists and criminals. I want the British government to put the British people at the top of the agenda.
But here's the thing. There will be no respect for the UK. While someone can be locked up and then persecuted behind bars for a piece of journalism, no matter how controversial. As Paul Thorpe put it, in the UK today, a civil offence prisoner is being denied access to his family, his friends, general visitors, and any visits from anyone with a social media presence. Now we are told he is being denied safe food while being locked up in solitary confinement 21 hours a day. Where is the outrage? Where are the MSM? Where are the celebrities? Where are our MPs? Where is the justice? It's invisible. It's absolutely invisible. Which is why more and more agree with me that only a political and media revolution can save the UK. Now, let me bring in Alex Phillips. Alex, so great to have you, especially today, given that you have also visited Tommy Robinson at HMP Woodhill. So before we move on to the politics, Alex, obviously the first thing I think of utmost concern is just whether Tommy Robinson is safe behind bars. Is he being politically persecuted? And why is there silence on this?
Right. I just want to make clear, when I visited Tommy Robinson at Hill Prison, I did so because I'd done an interview with him before he went to prison, and I wanted to find out how he was getting along. I don't know him brilliantly well. We have only met in the flesh that one time. And I think that that is the approach that people should take. You know, it's important to understand all sides of the story. When I went to meet him, it is important to point out that he was essentially subsisting on the foods that he could get in prison that weren't the prison issued food, because he's incredibly worried about prison issued food being tampered with. And this actually, it's the same reason why he's in solitary confinement. It's a damning indict on the way our prisons are. If you get inside them, they're essentially controlled by gangs, particularly Islamist gangs. So if he wasn't in solitary confinement, would he then be safe among other inmates? If he wasn't having to subsist on tinned foods and packets of crisps and sweeties and all the rest of it. Is he actually safe to eat prison food if there are people in that prison who take great umbrage at what he said and might wish to do him serious harm? So I think that what we need to look at here is the state of our prisons, which are essentially run by gangs, and that the idea of human rights in prisons is being massively undermined, as they are, frankly, across many walks of society right now, where the minority seems to have all the protections against everybody else, particularly the native-born population. So that is the way I would frame this entire situation. Now, I'm not abreast particularly of the latest manifestations of what's been going on here between Tommy, his team, and the prison authorities. But it does call into question that the fact that he had a civic case, really, and this normally wouldn't warrant a long incarceration, that he is a particularly high-profile prisoner, so therefore that comes with its own risks. And normally when we have these situations with other prisoners, it's amazing how much resource is accorded to protect them. I'm talking about people who have committed the most atrocious crimes against children, or other Islamists, let's say, people who, were they to be part of the general prison population, may be at risk of losing their life. And I think essentially we've got to look at Tommy Robinson within that remit. And there'll be people on one side saying, well, listen, he could eat prison food if he wanted to, that he could apply to not have solitary confinement, but then would that be risking his own life? I think that he's incredibly important in being able to shine a light on things in society that other people don't want to talk about. And actually, isn't it ironic that his incarceration is doing just that? When it comes to the debate within Reform UK, I'm also equally pragmatic. Which is to say, I know, everyone watching this, I hope, would also know that there is going to be an incredibly difficult position that Reform UK will face at some point if they were to say, we're coming out to back Tommy Robinson as a party. It would be used against them to divide the vote. And so at the moment, those divisions are being potentially played out internally. I'm not sure how divided they are as a team. I doubt that they're divided that much at all, because there's 5 of them. And certainly Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage have gone back to Brexit Party days. They know each other well. They respect each other. They talk to each other. And so I don't think I want to particularly attack Reform UK for having to do what is necessary to continue to garner support as what is a necessarily insurgent political force in this country. All of this needs to be used as a mirror held up against our system, whether that is the mainstream media, whether that's the legacy parties, whether that's the prison system, the courts, the judges. We are riddled with essentially two-tiered justice all over the place. And we're also riddled with this increasing censorship that actually a party like Reform UK should be able to turn around and say we're concerned about what's going on without it being used as a weapon against them to try and essentially disembowel their electoral support. So that's the facts of the matter here. I wouldn't want to sort of point the finger of accusation at any particular person other than back at the state itself.
The reason you're watching this show is because you know that these days, and we've been discussing it lots at the moment, it's impossible to trust the mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to patrol social media. And that's for a very good reason, given the Brexit debate, COVID debacle, and demonisation of Donald Trump. But I've got the solution for you. Today's sponsor, Ground News, created by a former NASA engineer to provide you with the only safe way to consume the headlines, is going to solve so many of these issues. Go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out for yourself, by the way. But I want to show you this incredible website and app in action. So let's take the recent story. We've discussed it lots of Outspoken of Elon Musk's fallout with Nigel Farage over Tommy Robinson, which the left-wing legacy media tried to whip up to destroy all 3 men, actually. And by looking at Ground News, you can see very clearly that it's collated the 230 sources on this story in one place. But what Ground News instantly shows is how the story is being covered by the media and broken down by whether those media organisations lean to the left or right, illustrated by its biased distribution service, which features on all stories. Then you can scroll down and actually see every article about the topic broken down by the political position or ownership of the publication. So in this case, it shows quite clearly that Fox News gave a fair analysis compared to Mediaite and The Independent, which did not, lambasting the men as morons with big egos without actually looking into why this split happened and how it can be resolved. What's more, Ground News gets to know you personally, providing you with the news stories you're interested in, while also analysing your own biases and coming up with potential blind spots you might not be hearing about because of your media consumption. And look, I know you love the news, that's why you're watching Outspoken, but you don't trust the legacy media. But what Ground News does is give you the tools to understand the truth about what is going on in the world. It is the only way I read the news now, allowing you to see through media bias and manipulative narratives with no more relying on the MSM to define what's really going on for you. So go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. You can subscribe through my link today for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. And I should say, by the way, Ground News is a really great organization. It is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors like Ground News, you also support my work too. And for less than a Netflix subscription, you can get all the world's news in one place and think for yourself. It really has been a game changer for a news junkie like me. So let me just repeat the address. It is linked in the show notes below, or you can click on the QR code if you're watching on screen. But the address, ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show. Can I just ask, Alex, though, in terms of your experience at HMP Woodhill? Because I guess what I was shocked by was the fact that Tommy Robinson is being housed in a wing of 16 cells that was literally designed for terrorists. Now, yes, you can argue it is for his own safety. Sure, you can. But that does raise a real point. I mean, you talk about gangs in the prison. Let's just be honest about it, right? These are Muslim gangs who specifically plan to target folk after the Southport massacre, the so-called rioters or Facebook posters who went into prison. I mean, that was even reported by Martin Brunt of Sly News. So can you forgive the authorities in terms of thinking, okay, we can't end up in a situation where Tommy Robinson ends up dead or ends up beaten up? But if that is the reason why, surely there is absolutely no excuse for cutting off contact with his family, stopping him ordering food like crisps. It really is starting to feel like physical and mental torture. But tell me about your experience when you saw him.
Right. Well, listen, I never particularly intended to go public about the fact I went to see him. It was a private thing that I wanted to do, having interviewed him, wanting to check in and actually meet him in person, have a fuller conversation face to face rather than the Zoom call I did, which I did for my own platform before he went to prison. It was following up on that and wanting to speak to him firsthand. And I would just leave it at that. Look, I've been very clear before that, you know, the man I've spoken to now, once remotely and once in person, comes across as incredibly intelligent, very engaging, very brave. I've not a bad word in that respect to say against him, but I'm not going to be pulled into any particular political tug of war over this. Do I think his treatment, or do I think the length of incarceration, the fact he's incarcerated at all, needs to be called into question? Absolutely. So I'm taking this sort of Rupert Lowe line on this, which is, you know, things need to be looked at without fear or without favour. When I met, and this a while now, this is way before Christmas, you know, we were put into a little small room together. One of his good friends was there. He was eating packets of crisps and Haribo, and at that point he was quite chipper, and this is going back some months, but this was very early into his incarceration. And of course, the longer that you're prevented from being in the real world and having connections and speaking to family and friends and seeing those people in real life, or just mingling with other humans, it has a hugely detrimental impact on somebody mentally. And I think those strains are beginning to show. I don't know the reasons for why he's now not allowed to see family. The signing of the NDAs, again, I'm not a legal expert, but certainly I think there have been a number of people who have gone to see Tommy Robinson in prison in order to then broadcast certain things. And perhaps we've also, I mean, it's interesting what you said, Dan, and I love the fact that what you said was, I went to speak to Tommy Robinson and it was important he gave me information that should be in the public domain. And I think that's absolutely right. But there has been, by certain elements of the independent media, fetishization now, wanting to go and speak to Tommy Robinson to then broadcast they've gone to speak to Tommy Robinson so that they might gain more following. I think we've also got to be candid about that as well. And perhaps that has now led to a situation, because Tommy will have no control. If someone's gone to speak to him in prison, he's got no control about what they say and what they broadcast after they've come out of prison. And if you were going to look at things legally and legally alone, and like I said, I'm not in any way, shape or form condoning the actions that the prison have taken, but if people were going to meet another prisoner who'd committed another crime and then coming out and making the case for that prisoner based upon what they're saying is first-hand information, I'm fairly sure the crackdown might also happen in that instance. So I think those people who have Tommy Robinson's best interests at heart need to ask themselves if they're going to visit him because it's a personal relation, because they want to make sure his welfare is okay and there's someone who goes to support him. If there's someone who's going to visit him perhaps for journalistic reasons, as I did, who then hasn't said anything about that visitation other than to you, or those people who are being opportunistic as well, and that this has now led to the situation that we're in now. I don't know. I haven't looked into this. I've not audited every single visit and what's been said and who's broadcast what. So I'm not in any position to criticize an individual or particularly the system. Although, like I said, I do think we do need to look at the system and ask ourselves whether it is appropriate, whether it is proportionate. And it comes down to one thing and one thing alone. When it comes to the level of fear amongst our institutions about Tommy Robinson, about what he might say or do, the influence he has. And this all boils down, of course, to the issues he was raising. It's very difficult for the state to handle those issues, to answer to those issues. And so they're doing what the state always does, which is to try to silence those issues.
Yes, and that is the key point. That is the key point, though, Alex. And look, the problem is so many of our traditions, right, which you might be able to say in the past made lots of sense. For example, our contempt of court laws so that people could get a fair trial, or the fact that journalists are not meant to report on prison visits without explicit permission from the governor. Now, in the past, they may have made sense in the type of society that we were. But now that we have a deep state that genuinely goes to great lengths to silence people or certain issues, I think we need a revolution of that system. And it was one of the reasons why I wasn't prepared to say silent about my visit, for example. Okay, do your worst. But I felt like there was a piece of information that was very, very much in the public interest, and I was clear to Tommy I was going to share it, and I did share it on my show as soon as I could. But do you understand what I'm saying? I feel like the state is using these old rules that maybe made sense in the past, because look at Southport, Alex. Look at what they did with Southport. Contempt of court even made the Speaker stop Nigel Farage raising it in Parliament.
Yeah, all of these things are what's so important, which is why I think we need to discuss this as the mirror held back at the state, because essentially what's happened is it's under the state's authorship that we've ended up in the mess we're in now, and they're now in mitigation. They're trying to actually prevent things from getting worse. And I think, it's interesting, you mentioned in Dan's Digest, J.D. Vance and the comments he made about Europe. And what he essentially said to the European leaders is, you're looking at us going, please save us from Putin. He's such a bad guy. But you were the people who were buying his gas. You were the people who brought him back to the table. You were the people, when he invaded Ukraine, that prevaricated on whether you could actually apply sanctions to Russia, because it might affect your own economy because you're so bound up with Russian oil and gas, whether to be able to sell on arms or give arms to third-party countries to use in Ukraine. Germany has blocked that, is still blocking it today. because they're concerned about, how this is going to affect them politically, economically. The German elections are coming up. European leaders have been totally discordant, totally weak. And this is not just the situation with Russia. This is the situation with mass migration. This is the situation with Islamism. There's a huge amount of fault in what Western European in particular leaders have been doing for decades now, which is burying their heads in the sand, either being, and this is what I don't fully understand, are these people delusional or are they deliberate when they turn around and say nothing to see here? Is it because they've baked in the problem societally so much that only they can be held culpable and they just can't admit it? It's very hard to admit that. Or are they doing this almost deliberately because there's a broader agenda? I don't know. But there are so many things now taking place, whether it's the incarceration and treatment of Tommy Robinson, whether it's the speech made at that Munich conference where European leaders all snivelled and rolled their eyes and got together in a group hug and said, nothing to see here, is not our fault. There needs to be a massive wake-up call in Europe, and that is what Trump's doing. That's what J.D. Vance is doing. That's why it's so interesting when questioned. Donald Trump kind of went, I didn't ask to see him. I didn't want to see Sir Keir Starmer. He's basically been begging to go and see Trump because he wants his Churchillian moment as the person who can resolve matters and get Europe and America speaking again. That's a good thing, I suppose, in principle. But why is he doing it? He's doing it because he's facing flack for his own domestic mismanagement. You look at the dire straits the UK is in. He wants some sort of diversionary tactic. He wants to be seen as the hero. It comes down every single time to ego, 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 ego of the elites. And while they're playing this game and gaslighting us, they are selling our nations up the river, and it is impending disaster. And that's what we need to keep our finger on the pulse of. Hold the mirror up to Europe. That is what J.D. Vance is doing. That's what we need to do, not getting sort of caught up in the weeds of this case, that case, the media debating all these existential things, or, personifying it in the character of Tommy Robinson. No, let's address the problems. And let's remember, of course, that is what Tommy Robinson was doing. That is why he has faced the chop. That is why he's in prison right now, because he said, to hell with it. I am going to continue to shine a light on some of the big problems going on in society. Whatever people want to say about me, I'm going to do it anyway. Some people would say his approach has been wrong. Others would say, well, actually, he was persecuted for doing this in the first place, and so now he's left with no option. But we need to just keep focusing on the failure of our political leaders. Our voices need to be heard at the ballot box. The mainstream media need to be talking about that stuff, rather than saying, oh, Trump said this, should he have spoken to Putin? This person said this at the conference, this is how they reply. Where is the mainstream media in saying, oh my goodness, some of these baked in societal problems have been going on for decades. Why are you not doing something about it? And what needs to be done? Asking those questions.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source, and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.